Hello and welcome to this thought for the day from the Chapels Royal, Her Majesty's Palace and Fortress, the Tower of London. Greetings and good health to you wherever you are. Today is Tuesday, the 29th of June, 2021. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. My question this week is, who do you think you are? For most of us, this is a challenging question, which implies that we are suspected of claiming some right or asserting some privilege to which we are not entitled. It is the sort of rhetorical question that we fling at someone who pushes in front of us in a queue or pinches our parking space. Well, I say we fling it, but more likely than not we just mutter it or simply form the question silently in our heads whilst our blood pressure rises and our mood goes from good to grumpy. A computer, asked to parse the question, should have no difficulty in understanding the vocabulary and grammatical structure, but it's likely to miss the sarcastic charge. It was because of the emotional baggage carried by the phrase that television producers chose it for the successful series in which people discover previously unknown facts about their forebears. Of course, the idea here is that you are the product of your parents' and grandparents' lives, that you are who you are because of who they were, or rather because of their socio-economic position and life experiences. It is not, we might feel on reflection, a theory on which too much weight should be placed. If my grandfather was a miner and my father a shopkeeper, but I am a concert pianist, in what sense did coal extraction and retail cash flow influence my musical gifts? Seen that way, the whole project falls apart. And yet, many people are fascinated by the program, so we clearly see something of interest here. In fact, we spend quite a lot of time talking and thinking about our families and their influences on us, even if it can be a bit speculative. So we might say, maybe it's because my parents were so socially timorous that I reacted against that and determined to become an actor. Or maybe I wanted to become an academic because my father always sneered at people who just read books and avoided real life, as he used to say. We might be getting a bit closer to identifying influences which shaped our lives with things like, because my parents were both immigrants from different countries, I was used to hearing foreign languages around the house, unlike my school friends who heard only English, so I had no fear of languages. Or, when I grew up, my parents were always volunteering to help other people, so their example of public service probably influenced my own career choices. But let's get back to the original question and ask it of ourselves in the context of prejudices against other groups of people. It is a commonplace that children will absorb the views of their parents and may cling to them even when faced with evidence showing that such prejudices are unhelpful and wrong. We often talk about head and heart and the conflict between the two. Even those who've made a conscious decision to revise their views may find themselves unexpectedly reacting negatively to other groups in a way which they find disturbing. To paraphrase St. Paul, we wish to do the thing that we should not do and wish to avoid doing the thing that we should do. We're all familiar with this kind of internal conflict from time to time. If we know rationally that something in us is reprehensible, why can we not simply change our behavior by an act of will? Why can head not impose itself on heart? In practice, in any battle between head and heart, the heart will usually win. We have reflected before on the existence of unconscious bias and how we try to eliminate it. That's a worthy enterprise, but we ought to be aware of what we are up against. So, meet Brian. Brian is my brain. Well, he's not actually my brain in the sense of the strange jelly contained within my own skull, but he is a model of a brain and he belongs to me. So he's my brain. On the outside, you will see the wrinkly surface of the brain, which we call the cerebral cortex. That's where all the rational thinking takes place. Now, the good thing about Brian is that he comes apart, so you can see some of the internal structures. Here is a very important one called the amygdala. Now, you'll probably be ahead of me here, but the fact that the amygdala lies deep within the brain, close to the brain stem, shows that it is, in evolutionary terms, extremely old. We have inherited the amygdala from our evolutionary ancestors, going back a very long way back. What does the amygdala do? The amygdala does something fundamental, which is to attach emotional value to our perceptions. So if our senses relay to the brain that there is a loud noise and a large object coming towards us, it is the amygdala which will trigger the flight response. That's a pretty crude example, but the same is true if we see a person approaching, something which happens hundreds of times a day and millions of times during our lifetime. Each time we see another human being, the amygdala tags that person in that moment as safe or dangerous, friend or foe, nice to know or not nice to know. Well, we might think that it's not a big issue. Our rational self, operating from the cerebral cortex, can correct for any bias. Sadly, it's not that simple. Firstly, as we've noted, in any contest between what we call head and heart, the heart usually has the upper hand. It's that darned amygdala, you see. Secondly, and I want you to listen very carefully, the reaction speed of the amygdala is 80,000 times faster, yes, 80,000 times faster than the cerebral cortex. That means that when your rational side tries to vie with your emotional side has an enormous head start. So beware of people who tell you that first impressions don't count. They do, and overcoming them is not easy. In the case of the approaching trains, cars, or hungry crocodiles, it's fairly easy to see why the amygdala is flashing out instant warning signals. But why should it do so when we see someone from another group different from our own? The answer is both complex and contested, but at least part of it is down to attitudes that we absorbed as children from influential adults and even our own peer group. Those attitudes can be fixed so that our amygdala, working 80,000 times faster than our thinking brain, has already tagged someone as bad, suspect, or just unpleasant at first sight. Our own life experiences may similarly shape what we often refer to as our instinctive response. Not a bad phrase in this context. Who do I think I am? I think I'm a mixture of the emotional and the rational, often in conflict. I catch myself thinking things that I don't want to think about people about whom I really have little knowledge. Understanding a little about how the brain works helps me to understand how this might be the case, but apart from the primitive fears such as fire and drowning, how far have I myself contributed to storing away negative responses which show themselves as, yes, our old friend, unconscious bias? When Jesus told the man of law to love his neighbor as himself, the man replied, "But who is my neighbor?" Behind this lies his thought that Jesus cannot really have meant that we should love everybody. Running through the man's mind were people whom he would certainly not think of as his neighbors and to whom he reacted with revulsion. And that's precisely the challenge. We've spoken about the cerebral cortex and the amygdala, the rational brain and the primitive brain, reason and instinct as separate entities, but they are, of course, intertwined elements in our own brains and therefore our own personalities. The challenge is to acknowledge that our emotional selves run ahead of our rational selves, but, and this is the key, not to give up the chase. The amygdala may have got a head start, but our reason can overtake it if we try. What is required above all is a determination not to give in to our basic instincts, but to realize our full humanity. And that, I suggest, is what God asks of all of us.